This week was Independence Week, and I want to just mention a couple of things about it. It's kind of in the middle of the week, so usually it's on a weekend. It kind of seems, and it's like, wow, that was already 3 days ago. But I'd just like to share a couple of things because 150 years ago was also the Battle of Gettysburg on this same date, correct? July 2, 3, and 4, and President Lincoln went to Gettysburg a few months later, I believe in November of 1863, and gave a speech. Most of us know or have heard of that speech, the Gettysburg Address. There was a speech before that speech, which was supposed to be the speech, and the president was just going to give a couple of words. It was by a guy named Edward Everett from Massachusetts, the greatest orator of the 19th century, the 1800s. Nobody's ever heard of the speech. Has anybody ever read it? Nobody, except me. My son and I read it this week because I didn't even know. It was a 2-hour speech about America. You should read it someday. It's very fascinating. It was interesting because cameras were just beginning to happen back then. They had all the cameras set up for Everett, and they expected when Lincoln got up that they could set up the cameras and have it all set up because he would speak for a long time. There are no pictures of Lincoln giving the speech because it was only a few moments long. And he was done before the cameras were reset after the previous speech. So there's no physical evidence except for the handwritten notes. There's, I think 5 speeches of it done. But let me just read a piece of it if I could, and just say a couple words before we get into the scriptures, because it really is germane to what we're going to say today and to our culture. And I'll just quote a part of the Lincoln's address, not Everett's address, so I won't do the 2-hour one, but just 2 sentences. 77 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal, that this nation under God shall have a new birth of freedom, and that government of the people, by the people, and for the people shall not perish from the earth. That is a great statement about this nation. We have wavered from that statement, and that's not the whole quote, but just a part of it. It's interesting, I shared a few months ago when we were talking about Godonomics, I shared about 2 men who were the signers of the Declaration 77 years before that, which is how many years? Anybody know what a score is? 20, okay, if you're not from British colonies, you wouldn't know that. It's a British statement. 80 is 87 years ago, which from 1863 would take you back to 1776. It was on the same days of the battle, 87 years before, that 56 men signed the Declaration of Independence. Only 3 of them lived to be 50 years after that. One was a man named Charles Cardwell, I believe was his name, from Maryland. He's long forgotten. But the other 2 men were the 2nd and the 3rd president of the United States. Everybody else of the 56 had long since died, but John Adams and Thomas Jefferson. And I love studying these 2 because John Adams is one of my favorite Revolutionary era people. And of course, Thomas Jefferson's probably the most famous of them. Thomas Jefferson, when he came to the Continental Congress, of which they were writing this or going to write this, he came from Virginia. He was a very wealthy man, owned hundreds of acres, began to build an estate called Monticello. He had 300 slaves. How you can write about everyone being created equal and having slaves is something that I don't get. But he had 300 slaves. When he came to Philadelphia, he rode in a carriage with 6 horses. I mean, he was a very proud Virginian. And I find even today, those from Virginia, they have a sense of pride because it's a commonwealth that was there from the beginning of our nation kind of had it. And I don't know, is anybody from Virginia? There you go. So you see that pride keeps, it's kind of, there's a loose line that keeps coming through all the way to today. But Thomas Jefferson came there. John Adams came from Massachusetts, a small house in Braintree outside of Boston. Not a wealthy man, a middle-class man. He was a Christian man. His father was Christian. Thomas Jefferson only went to church when he had to. But John Adams was a Christian. When he came to the Continental Congress, he rode in a single horse with one guy to help carry his bags, like an intern. Just a young guy carrying his bags. He came into town from the north Without fanfare, Thomas Jefferson came from the South with fanfare. It's interesting that they both wrote very important documents. Thomas Jefferson wrote the Declaration of Independence. John Adams wrote the Constitution of Massachusetts, the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, which became the cornerstone or the foundation that James Madison wrote, our U.S. Constitution. So though Madison wrote it, he wrote it from the documents that John Adams had written as well. Later in their lives, after they both became presidents, Thomas Jefferson went back to Virginia. John Adams went back to Massachusetts. When John Adams went back to Massachusetts, he lived in the same home he was born in. He added one room to his house to put his books in. Thomas Jefferson went back and added a whole estate called Monticello. He was building an estate for himself big. And here's the point. The point is this. Thomas Jefferson wrote those very famous words, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And he lived it out. John Adams believed in life, liberty, and the pursuit of God. Huge difference. Thomas Jefferson died, and most people don't realize this, in poverty. They had to sell Monticello to pay the debts of the estate. Yes, he was the third president. Yes, he wrote the Declaration. Yes, he even founded the University of Virginia. John Adams went back after he was president, became the deacon of the church he grew up in. He was a tithing deacon, by the way. His father was known as Tithing John. They were tithers in their little congregational church. At his death, before his death, John Adams told his 5 children, they came together, they had dinner every once in a while together. He said, "You will never meet someone on the road or street who says, 'You're my brother or half-brother,' because I have been faithful to my wife." Thomas Jefferson had more women than any of us can count, both from his slaves and from the population of Virginia. He sired, if I can use that word, dozens upon dozens of children. And even today, they're just figuring it out, who's descendants of Thomas Jefferson. John Adams was faithful. At the end of their lives, they both died on the same day, July 4th, 1826, 50 years to the day of the signing or the ratification of the Declaration. Declaration was actually signed on July 2nd, ratified on July 4th. They both died on the same day. Thomas Jefferson, 4 in the morning in Virginia. John Adams, 2 in the afternoon in Massachusetts. Thomas Jefferson wanted on his epitaph, as his epitaph on his gravestone, 3 things. Writer of the Declaration of Independence, 3rd President of the United States, founder of the University of Virginia. John Adams said nothing about his epitaph, wasn't proud enough to decide what to put, but his last letter to his granddaughter a few weeks before his death said this, "I want to be remembered," and he quoted Micah 6:8, "that I acted justly, I loved mercy, and I walked humbly before my God." Thomas Jefferson's children didn't even come to his funeral. His real children, his biological, is his children by family. John Adams had thousands of people parade by that little house in Braintree to give thanks to him. What was the difference? Brilliant men, both of them. Great orators. In fact, Thomas Jefferson was much better than John Adams when it came to that. What was the difference? One took seriously life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And if I can tell you, he never found it. He kept looking and looking and looking. And the other took serious life, liberty, and the pursuit of God. And he found it. And as we look today, we can see there's a divide in this country. And we are living out the Declaration of Independence in this country. Life, liberty, we would all agree to that. I mean, whether we're liberals, conservatives, this party, that party, we all kind of agree on life and liberty. But some think that the pursuit of happiness is the highest goal that we should have, and others of us think that the pursuit of God is the highest goal that we should have. And the question is, which do you think? When you're sitting in church, you would say, oh, it's God, pursuit of God. But in your entire life, as you live your life, which is it? Is it the pursuit of happiness or the pursuit of God? And today we're going to look at that, and I really see the divide in our nation even getting more pronounced. We've talked about this over the last few weeks. It is even more pronounced because if you believe the pursuit of happiness is one of the key goals, you are going to do certain things and you're going to allow yourself to do certain things. And if you believe the pursuit of God is the most important thing, you're going to do certain things that are different than those. And 1 Corinthians hits to the core of this because it's interesting. The more we understand the writers and the founders, James Madison, even George Washington, Samuel Adams, James Monroe, of course, the two I've just mentioned, they were all students of ancient Greece. They all knew the Greek language. It's amazing. When you read, these were smart men, and they understood democracy in ancient Greece.